Hi, everyone. My name is Audacious. I'm the founder and CEO of BWHR, known as Black Women in HR. And today is January, and it's the end of January, isn't it? And the last day of January. And I have my first podcast of the series of 2024. And today I have the remarkable Brittany. And Brittany Hell lives in New York. That's how far we reach the Black woman in HR community. And I'm super excited to have her here. Before we go in depth into what Brittany has to provide, her insights and knowledge and empowerment for all the Black professionals in the UK and globally, why don't I start by telling you a little bit about the beautiful Brittany? Okay, so Brittany S. Hell. What does S stand for?
It stands for Sade.
Sade, oh my God,
Yeah.
you're Nigerian. We didn't touch on that you were actually Nigerian heritage as well.
I am not, but well, at least I'm not. Although I did one of those DNA things, and allegedly I'm Igbo, so I will.
Okay, in Nigeria we have this famous musician called Sade.
Well, that's who I'm named after.
Oh, fantastic! That's the best person to be named after. She's iconic.
She's truly
national treasure to us UK when it comes to music. So well done you. I love it.
Yeah.
I love your parents for that. So you just say next time, just say, yes, I have some Nigerian heritage.
Exactly. Of course. Naturally.
So Brittany Sade Hale transcends the conventional role of a founder and CEO. She stands as a visionary catalyst for transformative change and beacon of inspiration for leaders across diverse industries. Wow. With a background in litigation, politics, and risk management, Brittany has paved her way to founding B&D Consulting Group, an embodiment of her passion and unparalleled expertise. Wow, wow, wow. She has been featured in publications such as Cosmopolitan, Marie Claire. You see how beautiful she looks from that, Essence, TechCrunch, and First Company for insights into entrepreneurship and leadership. In her capacity as CEO, Brittany has crafted impactful organizational culture strategies for numerous entities. And I don't want to keep reading. There's some data that comes with her being the CEO, and Brittany shared her expertise by lecturing on managing human behaviors in organization at Columbia University School of Professional Studies. Your bio is so impressive, and I don't want to use the word ageism because you look so young and beautiful, but well done to you. So I don't want to be textbook. So just dive in deep and just tell our audience about yourself.
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you for having me. This is so exciting, and I'm so excited to speak with other Black women in HR. So B&D Consulting, as you may know, it's not taken from my initials, but it's actually taken from one of my favorite poems, which begins, "Be nobody's darling." And that has been an adage that has shown up time and time again throughout my career. And it is my challenge to myself and my clients to seek the truth and do the right thing. And so, if I had to summarize my experience, it's being a millennial multi-hyphenate. Right. I started as an attorney, and I realized while I was trying cases, I was in-house. And as you know, HR and legal, they work very closely together. And I was trying many of the same cases, sometimes with the same actors, and I was undefeated. And I think that it was largely due to the ability to identify that gap between what a potential juror said and how they operated. And for those in HR, you always know, there's a gap between what a manager or, what a leader says and how they operate. And so over time, I realized that a lot of organizations function like scaled out juries, right? There's that gap between what they say and how they operate. But that gap is where they lose the time. It's where they lose the talent and resources. So I'm really passionate about closing that gap and creating better leaders.
Thank you. What a fantastic addition to your introduction. So we talked about law and legal. So, but you're into leadership right now. You're, I would like to say you're millennial or generation XYZ. So how did you move from legal, politics, risk management to leadership coaching, or do you still do both?
Excuse me. Yeah, so sorry, one second. So sorry about that. So I do not do both right now. Um, at this point, I focus mainly on leadership and organizational design. So essentially, what that means is coming in and reshaping how leaders make decisions. Now, typically we think of leaders as, the people in charge, but managers and leaders are not always the same thing, right? So I love to come into an organization and figure out the best ways for these leaders to be developed and really better align how an organization is operating. I just pause 1 second. Yeah, so coming in, one of my favorite things is to identify, like I said, that gap between what an organization says they value, how they say they operate, and how they actually operate. And so again, very often HR has a very specific understanding of those pain points, but they may not always have the tools or the support to address those issues at scale. And so when I come in through leadership coaching, very often it's a curative action to an issue, but also, preventative, because as an attorney, I know what it is to come in after the bad decisions are made. And so coming in to prevent those bad decisions from being made it's a joy.
Thank you so much. So I know we talked about you creating BND, and what did you say was
Be nobody's darling.
Be nobody's darling. And can you just go into more details about how how you created and the why? I know maybe some personal story that you're happy to share with the audience on Be Nobody's Darling. I love that, actually. Be Nobody's Darling. And how does Be Nobody's Darling integrate in the context of work?
Yes, I love that question. So how did I start it? Well, it all started in salsa class. And I was working, I was working as an attorney, and there was a woman in my salsa class who approached me. She knew I was an attorney, and she said, I have a question. I'm experiencing this issue at work with my manager. And so we're talking, and I said, this sounds like something for HR. You should really reach out to HR. And she said, we actually don't have an HR department. And I said, oh my gosh, that's a huge issue, And so I did some digging around. I did some research on the company, and I realized that they were very soon going to be facing at least a 6-figure lawsuit. And so I presented to the directors, and I said, you have a big problem and you don't know it. And so, I worked with them to build out that HR department, but also to provide leadership coaching to a leader, one of the top leaders in the organization. And so when we sat down, I said, well, give me your perspective on what being a leader means. And they said, oh, it's great. I never fire anyone. I just make them want to quit. And I was horrified. Yes, I see your thing, it's horrific. But this is something that leader thought was acceptable. And so when I went about starting my company, and, Be Nobody's Darling, again, it's taken from one of my favorite poems, and it inspires me to be audacious. It inspires me, again, to have the courage to ask the questions no one wants to ask, right? To endure that short-term discomfort for long-term gain. Because if I'm seeking the truth of the issue, which was this organization had a huge problem with leadership that was creating an increased risk for the integrity of the organization and the trust of the organization within that industry, and they didn't know it. So can we have the courage to be curious and seek to do the right thing? Which at that time was to provide that leader some support, maybe replace that leader, but ultimately, support the people within that organization, because they truly were the reason the organization was able to run.
Wow, thank you. I'm not going to let you go, but I'll just frustrate you out of my company in 2020 something, in the 20th
Right.
century, but
Right.
that was an opportunity for you. So fantastic. So we're talking about leadership and coaching and tomorrow's leader and how your leadership coach. But HR in human resources, I would say globally,
Yes.
we work with a lot of leaders. You could be a leader at junior level, executive level, or C-suite. How would you describe the role of a leader and the role of an HR person? Not necessarily, it could not be maybe executive level or C-suite, but what would you if you were to coach someone in HR, and how would you coach them to be a good HR leader?
So when I've worked with HR leaders, I've had some say, well, if I hire you, they'll know that I don't know what I'm doing. I have had others say, no one respects us. And I know, especially within the States and really globally, there's a frustration and a fatigue because many HR leaders know what it's like to operate with no budget, with, shorter budgets. You don't have as much access to resources as other verticals within companies that are revenue generating. HR typically is not a revenue generating vertical. And so, very often you're ignored, right? Or, in an effort to be preventative because the pain point isn't quite painful enough, leaders will say, we'll wait on it. So when coaching HR leaders, one, I want to know what drives them. What motivates you? Most people at work are motivated by one of three things. It's achievement, affiliation, or power. And when we think about power, there's two types of power. There's personal power, which means I get to tell you what to do, right? Clean your room, wash your dishes, sit in that chair, do your work. And then there's institutional power, which is the ability to create an environment for people to thrive. Most leaders confuse the two. So most leaders are preoccupied with personal power when they should be focused on institutional power. And HR leaders actually have the ability to facilitate that institutional power, right? Because you're guarding and creating the processes, you're guiding and creating the policies for the organization to run smoothly. And one of the questions that HR leaders face when they're identifying leaders, right? Many HR leaders know, for example, the 9-box assessment, right? How do you identify, okay, this person has high potential. Their performance maybe, but they have a lot of potential. What do we do with them? But we also know that management comes into play. So typically the way that it goes is the top performing person is put into a management position, regardless of whether or not they want to be a people manager. right? And sometimes they just want to be the top performer. They don't want to manage people. And that's where you have that turnover. So the question for HR professionals at this time, and I'm curious to know what you think, is what do we do with top performers? How do we keep top performers engaged who don't want to be people managers? How do we create pathways throughout the organization that allow them to advance if that's not their path? And so, I love creating opportunities for think tanks, right? These kind of internal spaces where these top performers, they can continue to be engaged. They can continue to, do the work that they love to do without putting them in a position that they may not be equipped for as a people manager. So that's typically how I support HR managers.
And I couldn't agree with you more. And I think that's a fantastic way of approaching it, because not everyone that is a high performer wants to be stretched. So they do want to be stretched, but I think is, what does that stretch look like? And also looking at your well-being, a work-life balance, their personal lives, or maybe if it's more technical, looking at the projects, the variety, the diversity. So it's a lot of mix. And like you said, yes, and not every high performer wants to be in a leadership role. Some people are very good technically, but they're not good people managers. So there's so many conversations that can happen. But thank you so much. I know our listeners would have picked so much. We're going back into you now as a Black woman.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So, and Black woman in HR, what I do, it's a lot of focus about diversity, equity, inclusion, and the key one is belonging. And I know in America, they're more active. So we've just had picking up the EDI-B in the last 3 years during the pandemic when the George Floyd things happened. But I still know there's that intersectional approach that as a black woman, we go through so much. There's so many barriers that we have to break. There's so many ceilings. There's so many, but I think it's my personal opinion. I think it's getting better. And I say that because we're having the conversations now.
Right.
We're doing the research. But I want to come to you. How has it been for you as a Black woman thriving in New York?
Yeah. So I'll be quite frank, and I know that race in the United States, it's a very unique experience. When I travel to other places or when I speak to other professionals in other countries, their concept of race is different than how it is in the United States. So, for example, as an attorney, very often, so less than 2% of attorneys in the United States are Black women. And the numbers, so I would come into a courthouse and people would say, "Are you the translator? Are you a secretary?" Just their belief in
unconscious bias.
what exactly. And so being an entrepreneur, we look at Black women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs within the United States, which is really exciting, although they receive less than 1% of funding for entrepreneurs, and at the same time have some of the lowest fail rates in their industries. And so, for people listening, that's the challenge, right? If you're essentially a sure bet, right? You have some of the lowest fail rates. We know Black women are highly educated. We have to be highly diligent in how we show up. Why are we not receiving the same level of funding? And so, that's been something that I have been able to use as a tool when I am working with leaders who are wrestling with that unconscious bias, right? Very few people, if you meet them and say, "Are you racist? Are you biased?" Very few people are going to say yes, right? And so that's where we have to to engage in a dialogue and know what we want to achieve. So when I come into an organization, again, I look younger than many people, think that I am. So they may think, I don't know what I've practiced law for over 10 years. People don't understand that. And it's not always malicious. Our brains are taking in more information than we can consciously process. But at the same time, your belief in what a brilliant business leader looks like, you immediately think Elon Musk, Steve Jobs, right? Older white men.
Oprah, and Oprah was 70.
And Oprah, right? Oprah. But when Oprah looks around,
yeah, there are not many Oprahs. Then we have
right?
Michelle Obama, and that's it. We have
right.
Oprah, Michelle Obama, and that's it.
Right, and those were what 20
and we have
years
so many
between.
other people that I don't remember their names, but
exactly. But we have Ursula Burns, right,
yes.
who became the first Black woman to head a Fortune 500 company, and we have so many other leaders that are deserving of this spotlight, but who haven't been engaged because it's been people want to believe it's a fluke, when in fact they're not the exception to the rule, they're the rule. Again, Black women are highly educated. We are high performers. We have a number of, we're able to engage a certain amount of creativity because of the fact that we've just been underestimated in a majority of our work. So we don't always have the luxury of being average, right? We usually have to be quite excellent in how we show up.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong if a Black woman is ambitious. I think I had a conversation today. There's nothing wrong, but I think when we're ambitious, we can be described in some unkind words because we're just women. So it's been really insightful, but I have one final question for you.
Sure.
And I think that's really key for anyone that watches this playback is what 3 key advice would you give anyone that's just secured their first leadership role? What would be your key advice? So I've just been successful and I've just secured my first leadership role. I'm thinking, oh my God, what does leadership mean? As in, what would you tell that person? What are the 3 key things? Take away.
3 key things. Okay.
3 key
well,
things.
the first thing I would say is congratulations. Because very often people will not want to celebrate with you, and do not let their reluctance get in the way of your celebration. You got there, you are deserving, and congratulations. The second thing I would share is something that was shared with me, which is stop approaching your power with humility. You are likely there because you are a powerful person. And as I mentioned before, embrace that institutional power. Know that you now have the ability to create an environment for people to grow and thrive, and be that person, right? Don't get focused on the personal power where, now I get to flex and tell people what to do. But grow people, because that will continue to engender trust and loyalty. And the last thing is find your support. Leadership is lonely. And that is something that we don't learn very often. But again, when Oprah looked around, for 20 years before Michelle Obama came on the scene, there are a lot of situations where Oprah could not look around to many of her peers, right? There are a lot of women who are going to be listening and realize, I don't have that many people that I can engage with. So find your group. Listen to Black Women in HR. There's a burgeoning group there. Make sure that you have a leadership coach. You need to establish a space of safety where you can say, I don't know. And I have to go out there and I have to figure it out. But in this space, I want to be vulnerable. I want to be questioning. I want to be curious. And so those are the 3 pieces of advice that I would offer to someone. And I hope it's helpful.
Super helpful, because I'm even going to take the second one is
Yes.
leadership with humility. So yes, that's really good. So Brittany Shadehel, it's been a pleasure to have you. But before I close this out, anyone that wants to reach out to you, please tell us how can they find you, your social media handle, what you're comfortable to share so they can reach out to you. We will tag your social media when we post it on social media and YouTube. But just in case people
Absolutely.
they don't have that keen eye for details, please
Yes,
share
yes,
how
yes.
our audience can reach out to you. And what services do you and also what services do you provide? And they can actually.
Sure. Sure. So I offer executive leadership coaching, group coaching, as well as one-on-one. Again, the motivation assessment where I said, people are motivated by one of three things. I do that for organizations as well. And I provide leaders with support on how to engage with teams once they understand that team breakdown and motivation. But you can find me on at BND Consulting, Nobody's Darling, BND Consulting on all platforms. And our website is www.bndconsulting.group. So look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to have you. I just I think 30 minutes of you speaking has been very insightful. I know anyone and everyone that watches this playback will be empowered, and hopefully they reach out to you for more support. So thank
I
you.
appreciate it. Thank you.